Hann. Good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad, Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. There is so much on our radar today, so much to talk about, but so little time. Of course, the main news that we will be discussing on the show today is the announcement to ease the MCO for businesses. However, an important piece of news that we also would like to note on the show is that today over 300 immigration department officers had carried out a massive raid on undocumented migrants at Masjid India, which is under the enhanced MCO. And this is after assurances by Putrajaya that it would not take action against those in the 3 buildings without papers. Now, I wonder what's changed from the point where they said that no action would be taken and they wanted undocumented workers to come in to get tested, and now this. What do you think, Sharaad?
Well, Melisa, apart from the ethics of all this, the public policy considerations, when you have a U-turn in terms of what you say, and you mentioned the reassurance, and then you do quite the opposite. So it doesn't build trust, and you need trust for cooperation. The other thing, of course, is, again, we have this problem of where are you going to put all these people that you've arrested? Are you going to house them in our already overcrowded prisons? Are you going to put them in the special MCO prisons or facilities for migrant workers? And will those then become a problem in terms of social distancing and a potential cluster if the infection gets there? Huge amount of problems. Not quite sure why whoever was in charge of this decision made this decision at this point in time.
Exactly. We're going to keep a close eye on this story as it develops. But speaking of U-turns, also making headlines today is the Bank Negara confirmation that interest will now be charged on the deferred instalments of hire purchase loans and fixed rate Islamic financing. Now, to many, this runs contrary to the FAQ that Bank Negara released on the 30th of March, in which it stated that the 6-month instalment deferment will not incur interest charges. Joining us on the line now to help clear up the confusion is Liew Ooi Han, CEO of RinggitPlus.com. Ooi Han, good evening. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. Now, there seems to be a lot of unhappiness out there over the announcement that interest will be charged on deferred installments. Many perceive this as a U-turn in policy. Ooi Han, do you agree that this is a U-turn?
Hi, evening guys. Thanks for having me. I think if you look at the various releases from Bank Negara as well as the Association of Banks in Malaysia, it's very easy to just go and assume that this was the case. I think after Yassin's first speech on Prihatin, B&M as well as the banks came up with various FAQs detailing various things. I think if you look at Bank Negara's press releases, they've always maintained that interest will accrue but may not compound on the various loans. And most banks try to figure out what that meant. And within the FAQs, unfortunately, there was a couple of illustrations of how this would be executed. And in those illustrations, it showed 2 important things. One, you would have the same installment amount for hire purchase loans after the moratorium is over, and the same amount or same number of installments. So that kind of implies no interest accrued, not let alone compounded. I think, and then a lot of banks came up with statements saying, "Yep, that's how we will do it too. This is how we'll calculate it." Unfortunately, that's not what's come out today. Today, what's come out is from the ABM, not Bank Negara, from the Association of Banks in Malaysia. So the banks themselves have said, look, for hire purchases, because of the Act, there are 2 changes. One is a little bit minor, which is opt-in is no longer automatic. You've got to do a couple of things regarding consent. That's a minor inconvenience, not the most contentious change. The more contentious change is the one where you've got 2 options after the moratorium is over for car loans, so hire purchases and fixed rate Islamic financing, which is after this moratorium period, you've got 2 options. One, repay back the entire deferred installment amount one shot, so that's 6 months worth of installments in October, no interest still if you do that. Or 2, option 2, you can sort of convert that part of that deferred installment into and repay it over a longer period of time, the extension of 6 months, and have interest accrue on it. I think that the last bit is the contentious bit. The have interest accrue on the deferred interest is the change. Now, Bank Negara maintains, look, in our releases, we've always said accrued. and calculations are just for helping people understand how this works. It's really the banks that have to say, look, like, this is how we're going to treat it. I may not treat it like Bank A, I'm Bank B, I'll treat it this way.
Right.
And that's been a clear change from what they've got on their websites today. They haven't quite changed it to respond to the AVM's options yet. Many of them have not changed, and it's very obvious that they have no interest in the AVM statement.
Oh, well, Ooi Hann, one of the concerns, of course, is, and I think this is in the public, is who to blame. But actually, I'm not that so concerned about whether we should blame the politicians that repeated the mistakes or the initial communications from Bank Negara. The more important thing is that the objectives of the moratorium. If you take the objectives of the moratorium of lessening the burden, how does these new scenarios pan out for the individual taking the loan? I mean, paying a lump sum at the end of the moratorium period sounds really onerous, and I can't understand how that squares with the original objective of the moratorium. What you'd say?
So I would say it's kind of a compromise, if you ask me. Option one is for the folks who don't quite need the cash flow, if you think about it that way, right? You should take the moratorium anyway. Save up those installments in a deposit account of your choice over the 6 months. At the end of it, pay back the entire accrued installments, keep the deposit interest. So if you have the luxury to do that, you're in the money, well done. So that's option one. For the folks that can't quite afford to do that, like the folks that you mentioned, who need the moratorium, not just would like it, who need it, they're going to have to stomach a little bit of interest across the remaining tenure of their hire purchase financing. And ultimately, it's a cash flow gain rather than an interest gain. So the argument here is that they may not have the cash today over the next 6 months. There's some relief there, but it's cash flow gain rather than outright benefit in your pocket.
So, Ooi Hann, does this so-called reversal benefit banks more than borrowers?
I think it's again, it's a little bit here and there. So if you're in the group who are fortunate to be able to consider taking option one, that's basically 6 months worth of accrued, accumulated deferred interest and installments that you can earn interest on. You're benefiting from the banks. With the second group who have no choice or may have to take option two, that's basically paying a little bit more interest than you were expecting to pay. Bank Negara has come up with some calculations. Hey, look, your installment might go up by a little bit to reflect that, and that is essentially going back in the hands of the banks. You're paying interest back to the banks.
Right.
And I mean, there's no better way to see how the benefit is in the stock market. Stock prices of the large banks today. After the announcement comes out, the largest banks in Asia are up by 2 or 3%.
Okay. Can I, very quickly, we only have less than a minute left, but I want to ask you, you mentioned earlier it is really up to the banks to decide. Do you expect that to be standardization across banks for this?
Very quickly, what we saw with the last announcement was banks slowly falling in line to be very aligned with each other. So one bank would announce a policy, and if it was a good one, most people would ask their existing bank, hey, why don't you follow that policy? That looks really good. That looks good for me. Please follow that. And banks which did not follow that were told by the consumers, hey, state your policy. We hope it's like this one. So we expect banks to be fairly aligned when it comes to this one as well.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Ooi Hann. We're going to take a quick break. After this, we'll look at the likely implications of the latest round of easing of the MCO. So stay tuned to consider this.